What's going on, U.S. history kids? Mr. Tomei here. Another video homework assignment, right? We're moving on, talking about how the Cold War escalates, going through the 1960s. So we're moving away from the 50s. We're creeping ever so closer to present day. We will be there by the end of the school year, but we got to go through some things first. So let's get into it. So we're going to start off talking about kind of a very influential president, one of the more infamous or famous, important presidents in U.S. history, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, also just commonly known as JFK. You've probably heard those three letters before. There's airports, schools, all sorts of things named after JFK, Kennedy High, things like that. So a very influential person for a variety of reasons. He's our 35th president. He defeats Richard Nixon. You might want to remember that name. Nixon's a guy who we're going to talk about in a couple of videos. But he defeats Nixon in 1960 and takes over for Eisenhower as our new president. The Kennedys are a pretty elite family, generally pretty wealthy, well-off. Back east, like a New England OG money type family. But JFK, like, he had some like progressive ideals at the time, including getting America into space, improving civil rights, which we're going to talk about in our next video, and then generally speaking, easing Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union. So JFK is we're going to talk a lot about him in this lecture today. So one of the first big issues of the 60s, and it really starts in the late 50s, is the Cuban Revolution. For those who don't know really anything about Cuba, Cuba's a pretty large island off the coast of Florida. It's pretty big. I'd say, if I had to guess in terms of size, maybe about the same size as California. It's a pretty big island. And it's 60 miles or so off the coast of Florida. You can get from Cuba to South Florida in a very easy puddle jump flight, very short. So this is a very close neighboring country to us, okay? They go through a communist revolution. It's led by this guy named Fidel Castro. He's the guy here in the middle. He was a guerrilla revolutionary leader, kind of a guy who's like in the trenches, trying to fight, convincing the people, going to the farmers, doing the work that it takes to get people to buy in. He was really 10 toes down for a communist revolution. And so he was successfully able to overthrow the formerly American-supported government there. And he did so in 1959. And then as he took power, he assumed, right, the leadership position, and Cuba became a communist country and it aligned itself with the Soviet Union. For a lot of years up until this, us, the United States and Cuba, we actually have a unique relationship that we'll talk about in class. But we had a pretty strong relationship with Cuba. A lot of that has to deal with imperialism. But again, we'll talk more about the relationship specifically in our class. So obviously, with the Cuba becoming a communist country, as a capitalist democratic nation, we were not cool with this. And this was a neighboring country. And this, was not what we really wanted on a geopolitical scale. So we launched a secret low-key mission to go in, pretty much overthrow the communist government and try and reinstate the old leadership and the old ways. It's known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. It's an absolute failure. We have a ton of CIA operatives who were caught or captured and killed, and it was supposed to be kind of, on the low. It wasn't a huge military invasion. It was supposed to be kind of like Tom Clancy, Splinter Cell, get in, get out type thing. Did not work that way. And as a result, this only made our relationship with Cuba worse. Fidel Castro already looked at the United States because of the years of imperialism with a distrusting source, and this kind of just confirmed this. It strengthens Cuba and the Soviet Union's relationship, and so now the U.S. is a threat. And you're probably wondering, well, Tomei, Cuba's just a small little island country. Why didn't they launch a full-scale invasion of the island? Again, you have to be careful during the Cold War in the era of mutually assured destruction. If you invade Cuba, you have to think about what is the Soviet Union's response. So there was a serious fear that a large-scale invasion would trigger something worse, right? What would happen elsewhere around the world? And the United States didn't really want to do that. So for those of you that are wondering, that's why we just didn't do a full-scale military invasion. Again, Cuba's location is very important. It's just off the coast of Florida, right? It's 234 miles to Miami. Shorter from here. That's shorter than here to LA. It's also very close to other cities, primarily when we talk about nuclear missiles, right? This makes it very easy to launch land-based missiles and launch them into the United States. And this was one of the primary fears about a communist Cuba being aligned with the Soviet Union, is that now the Soviet Union would have an ally and a place to put their missiles and point them straight at us. And this leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis. This huge event, probably the closest the world has ever come to going full-scale nuclear war, lasts for about 2 weeks in 1962 in October. Now, we had already, as a nation, had already had missiles in like places like Turkey and Italy. These are places that are really close to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, they weren't very comfortable with that. So as a response, they wanted to put missiles in newly communist Cuba. Again, this is a clear warning and a threat to the United States. Tensions are rising here. Eventually, JFK made the decision that, look, if Cuba's going to participate in having these nuclear missiles here in Cuba, then we're going to make it hard for them to get supplies in and out. So we essentially run a blockade around the island, right? It's the easiest thing to do to an island is run a blockade. Pretty much saying, you know, look, no Soviet Union, no, nothing that's going to aid their war effort. So we tried to kind of economically squeeze them, you know, and force them to change. And the Soviet Union wasn't cool with this, and they were sending military cargo ships, right? And it was getting closer and closer to when they were going to run into the blockade. So this went on for a couple of weeks, but after really tense negotiations and really close to nuclear war, I'll show you a video in class that shows how close it actually got. The U.S. agreed to move its missiles away from the Soviet Union, so out of Italy and Turkey, and they would no longer meddle with the Cuban government in exchange for the Soviet Union to withdraw their missiles from Cuba. Thus, disaster averted. It was a big thing, dominated the news, very scary time in America. And here's just some pictures. So that's the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. You see, like, you know, on the main news, right? Blockade. You see people who were protesting no war in Cuba. The whole thing. Big moment in U.S. history. And unfortunately, JFK, who had a lot of great ideas and was trying to move a lot of things forward in this country, he was assassinated very early on to his presidency, only in his third year. He was in Dallas, Texas. He was with the governor. They were kind of, you know, just a political mission, right? Nothing particular. He was just visiting. And he was riding like in a convertible motorcade where he was shot by this guy named Harvey Oswald. And he died on arrival to the hospital. He was shot in the head. Pretty unfortunate, very sad day in American history. It's the last time a president has been successfully assassinated. And JFK was pretty beloved by the American people in a lot of ways. He really wasn't hated. He was a young, good-looking guy, had a young family with young kids. You know, kind of was the quintessential perfect family. Again, the Kennedy name means a lot, has a lot of power. He had powerful siblings, and then they were well respected and liked. And so, in general, it was a very somber, sad moment in American history. Harvey Oswald, his story, he was actually living in like kind of Soviet Union occupied places in like Russia and other places as such. And so there's theories that, you know, he had kind of maybe become corrupted by communism and that he wanted, this was his way to, you know, maybe try and overthrow the government. He was actually a military dude, so he was trained, right? Trained how to shoot and operate a gun, a U.S. military dude. So he actually ends up getting killed a few days later by a pretty angry American, like Texan guy who just runs up and shoots him, right? So we never really will know, I guess, the full true story of why he did it. And then the next guy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he also is an acronym, LBJ, just easy. He takes over immediately for the presidency. And he actually becomes a controversial president because of what happens in Vietnam. We'll talk about him a little bit in the next video as well. That's John F. Kennedy's wife, Jackie Kennedy. This is a few hours after her husband has just been killed. What you can't see, if you were to look a little bit lower, her dress that day, if we were to go back, it's pink, and there's actually blood on her dress from her husband when LBJ is getting sworn in. So it's kind of a trip, but she's on the plane when it happens. Yeah, crazy stuff. We talk about more about this if we had time, we just don't. So we keep going here. JFK's legacy is mostly that he'll be remembered for preventing a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. He advanced civil rights. He was the president who was in charge when civil rights advanced. And he helped get us to the moon, which he never got to see, unfortunately. And in just a short time period, JFK just accomplished a lot of legislation and policy that was really important. The Kennedy family, though, they kind of have, unfortunately, a lot of sad stuff that has happened to them. JFK's kid, many years later in the 90s, died in a plane crash. JFK's brother, a few years later, was assassinated when he was running for president. There's other things about the Kennedys. It's just they've had very unfortunate luck and ill-fated early deaths. Very sad. That's Robert F. Kennedy, RFK. That's the brother who was assassinated a few years later next to him. Last thing we're going to talk about is the space race. This was one of JFK's goals, unfortunately, he never got to see fully realized. So the many things the US and the Soviet Union competed over, one of the more fascinating ones was like science and space exploration. For a long time, the Soviet Union had kind of had the edge over the United States in terms of getting to space first, putting a human in space first. They had a lot of firsts. But the big goal was trying to get to the moon. And that was Kennedy's goal, is like, we are going to put someone on the moon. And so, you know, the creation of NASA happened, as well as the goal to get to the moon, including the Apollo missions. And they were all designed to get a human on the moon. And so after years and years and billions of dollars, Apollo 11, the 11th mission, successfully landed on the moon on July 16th, 1969. The moon landing is one of the most watched television events in history, with over 600 million people watching. It's one of the most watched singular events in world history. The significance of the American flag being planted on the moon definitely increased American morale during the 60s, especially after the assassination of Kennedy. It was kind of seen as, man, wouldn't he be happy and proud if he was still alive to see it. It was also a very powerful piece of propaganda saying, hey, the United States, we put the flag on the moon. You know, Soviet Union, haha, you can't do it. And the Soviet Union never would. The Soviet Union would soon deal with economic problems, kind of that comes with communism, and we'll talk about that as well. And of course, it's pretty infamous for Neil Armstrong, right? He's the guy on the left there. You know, that's the crew, and he's the guy on the left. And he's the guy that says, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, right? So, pretty cool. Will we ever go back? Who knows? Who knows? Again, showing you it was watched from around the world. I just included this one because memes. I saw that one online, so I included it. Then, of course, you probably heard of Elon Musk and people going to Mars. TBD on that. We'll see. Who knows? That would be pretty insane. They've been talking about it. It's possible, but I don't know if it'll actually happen. And I think that's it. Cool. All right, team. Well, hey, that's our video. Make sure to follow along and answer the questions. And I will talk to you later.